This video is about requesting payment on purchase orders. We also call this submitting POs. There are generally two methods to request payment on purchase orders. I will walk you through the short method, the quick method, which is simply finding the purchase orders that you want to get paid on and putting a check mark next to the purchase order number by clicking in here in the little box next to the PO. Once you do that, you'll notice that the Submit POs button down here goes from a grayed out status to somewhat darkened, which means that the button is now enabled. And after you've selected one or multiple purchase orders by clicking a check mark next to them, you can then go ahead and click the Submit button, which brings up verbiage. And the verbiage basically says that the purchase, you're going to agree to be paid what's on the purchase order, which means that you agree with the total amount, you agree with the pricing on the individual resources, and you agree to the tax amount. Once you click the agree, you actually also have a couple of options if you want to print out that verbiage and keep it for your reference. Or just click the checkbox here to agree, and that enables the continue button. And what pops up next is a summary, a list of all the purchase orders that you clicked on, as well as a subtotal or total. And you have the option to print that information for your records. I'm going to go ahead and print these. And then once you print that, you can go ahead and hit close. And what will happen is the purchase orders will be removed from the open PO list, and they will wind up on the Submitted tab. I'm going to go over the Submitted tab momentarily after I cover the slightly longer version of requesting payment. Basically, the Submitted tab is where you can track the status of the requested for payment POs. The somewhat little bit longer method of requesting payment is you can go into the detailed PO by double clicking on the row of the PO that you want to request payment on. That will pull up the detailed purchase order, whereby you can type in your invoice number. I'm going to make up an invoice number here. And the reason for this, the reason that you may want to do this is if you want to put a cross-reference into our system, into Fisher's system, between your purchase order, between your invoice number and our purchase order number, such that down the road, if you have a question about the status, or if we have a question, we can look up the purchase order by your invoice number. So basically what that does is it puts your invoice number and it cross-references into our system by purchase order number. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in here, and then basically what you'll do is you will click this button, Mark PO for Submittal, and effectively what that does is it puts a check mark next to the PO along with the invoice number. And once again, you can do that on multiple POs. Now I have two of those marked. And once again, this goes from disabled or grayed out to enabled. It's darkened in, so I'm going to click on that. I'm going to agree with the terms, continue, print the summary, and close. And once again, the purchase order will have been removed from the open PO list and moved over to the submitted list. Now I'm going to go over the submitted list. Once you've submitted several purchase orders, you can track the status over here on this tab by clicking the Submitted tab. It will bring up all the purchase orders that you've requested payment on and give you an indication of the status. And I'm going to walk through. There should be three statuses that you will notice on this tab. You have the PO number, the invoice number if you key that in, the job number, the total, the submittal date, and the job status. The submittal date will happen. Let me walk through the stages of submittal or requesting payment. As soon as you request payment, what will happen is it will send an electronic copy of your request for payment to a electronic process of Fisher Homes that is basically a queue that will be processed by a background piece of software, and before it's processed, it'll just have a blank date under this column, and it'll just say submitted. That just indicates that you have requested payment, and it's going to be picked up by our background process. And then the next stage will happen is it will grab that individual PO. It will do what we call process it, which is effectively distributing the purchase order electronically to our superintendents and various internal pieces of software for approval so that this purchase order can get paid. And the date that that processing happens will be stamped on that purchase order number. And typically that happens within minutes of your original clicking over here on the open tab. And you'll see typically the same date, the e-submittal date that you request payment. And then I don't have any to show you right now, but what happens is then it goes through the approvals. The superintendent will approve it for payment. We also have on variance purchase orders, we have various internal approval processes that happen. All of these happen rather rapidly, and by contract, I believe the contract that you sign indicates that you will be paid 2 Fridays after the superintendent approves the purchase order for payment. In a typical scenario, and don't hold us to this, but in a typical scenario, it gets paid more rapidly than that. It typically gets paid if you are able to request payment on a Monday. The typical scenario, again, no guarantees on this, that's not in the contract, but the typical scenario is it will be paid on the same Friday if you can get it done on a Monday. Superintendent will see your request for payment once it's processed. He will then typically approve it for payment, and if it's a variance purchase order, sometimes that will happen just as rapidly by the various parties inside Fisher Homes, and it will be paid on a Friday. And once that, typically on a Wednesday or Thursday, you will see a job status change from processed to pending. And what that indicates is our accounting department has received all approvals on that particular purchase order, and they are preparing a batch, what we call a batch, which will then have a check cut from it. And that check will be sent out on a Friday. If you have a direct deposit, you would typically see the money in your bank on a Saturday then. Again, the pending indicates that those particular line items, and this typically happens on very late on a Wednesday or more likely on a Thursday, it is going to be paid that week.